One of the great things about having been a science fiction and horror buff all these years is looking back at the memories of so many classics that I've enjoyed throughout the years. I've also noticed how there are common themes that kind of spread out throughout different types of films. One particular theme is what I would call the nuclear theme. What do I mean by that? Well, what I actually mean by that is, the whole thing about atomic warfare, nuclear weapons. Everybody knows that that's not a good thing. There have been so many movies throughout the ages that have that intertwined. I mean, ever since they found out the secret of the atom to learn how to split it and cause such a chain reaction that a whole city can be blown up with like 40,000 megatons of TNT with one single bomb. It's put our entire planet in a state of like hostage. I grew up during the Cold War, during the 80s, 70s and 80s. And this was a big threat back then. Like it was the Soviet Union against the United States. And who's going to shoot first? Who's going to shoot first? I mean, we could go on all about that. But what the point of this is to give you guys, in my opinion, the top 5 nuclear movies. You ready, guys? Here we go. Number 5. A movie that came out in 1983. Not necessarily a horror movie or a sci-fi movie, but it sure kept my attention. Was a film called The Day After. And it was a movie that made headlines all over the country. It depicted what would happen if, in fact, a nuclear exchange would happen between, at that time, the United States and the Soviet Union. And it was traumatizing to watch. I mean, I was in junior high school at this point. I was entering high school. And I remember saying, yo, is that can really happen? Basically, there was some problems overseas. And then it became a conventional war between the United States and the Soviet Union. And then it became a full nuclear exchange, wiping out cities. We saw what people would have to do to seek shelter. We saw the nuclear bombs literally going off, mushroom clouds, something called an electromagnetic pulse response, which would shut off anything that was electrical, shut off the electrical grid just merely minutes before the bomb would go off. It was not an easy watch. There was actually a debate with all these scientists and leaders afterwards that discussed the problem and the threat of a nuclear exchange and how it can be done to, prevent that from happening. There's like scenes of it all over YouTube. Like you can, just type in The Day After and you'll find it. It's like, and you see those scenes and you'll be like, wow, yeah, that would not be cool. Number 4 is a movie called, this came out a year later in 1984, called Wargames. It starred Matthew Broderick and Ali Sheedy, and it was about this kid who was a computer whiz. He was able to tap in his little DOS computer. There were no, none of these back then. He was able to hack into the nuclear codes of the U.S. government, and it sparked this fear, this terror about, the potential for a nuclear exchange. The computer itself was about to go independent and self-conscious to the point that it wanted to set off the nuclear bombs. It was filled with so much intensity and so much it gripped a lot of people nationwide on their seats when this movie came out. Because again, it speaks of that fear that this could potentially really happen. All it can take is some computer genius to hack in to the mainframe of a nuclear thing, and oh my God, it's lights out. I found it to be a great film. It was good film for its time. Matthew Broderick and Ali Sheedy, they were young. They were awesome in this film, and they really worked out their characters well in trying to, get the computer to get back to just simply play a game of chess instead. Number 3, 1984, The Terminator. The Terminator, with Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator, Linda Hamilton as Garukana, and Michael Biehn as Reese, who came from the future to help protect her and her unborn child who would eventually lead human beings in a resistance against the machines that would take over everything after a full nuclear war. As a matter of fact, it would be the machines we would learn later in Terminator 2 and on in all the other Terminator films that would come. It would be a computer grid that would actually be the thing that would set off a full nuclear exchange. As a matter of fact, if I can just refer to Terminator 2, there's a scene where Linda Hamilton, when Carol Connor is having a dream about she's in the playground and then a nuclear bomb goes off in her city and everybody gets crispy fried. It's not even so much the what happens during a nuclear blast, but those who survive, they wouldn't survive afterwards. I mean, the movie is filled with action and suspense, and it's like all this stuff, and we got introduced to the whole concept of how machines, if not treated right, would become self-aware and become its own consciousness that would attack humanity. But again, this is a film that depicts the threat of nuclear war in a not so realistic way. It really took it into the realm of science fiction at that point, which I really appreciated because it kind of like deadens the blow of it being for real. Because the day after, that could have really happened. Okay, number 2. Here's one you wouldn't think I would bring up. Planet of the Apes. The original 1968 classic starring Charlton Heston and Linda Harrison as Nova. Okay, we all know this story. Astronauts land on a planet. They think it's a planet of apes. Taylor, the main character, which is played by Charlton Heston, gets captured by the apes. And he can't talk. He got shot in the freaking neck a little bit, so he can't, he's having a hard time speaking. All humans are mute. They're dumb. They're like brutes. They're like animals. Apes are the dominant species on this world. And Taylor thinks he's on another planet the entire time. Don't accuse me of a spoiler alert issue that I'm not giving you guys a spoiler. This movie came out in 1968, for God's sake. And with all the other incarnations of this film and sequels and everything to the kind that has come up, I don't want to hear it. So after getting freed, what does Charlton Heston find? He finds at the very end of the film, sitting on the ocean right there on the beach, a half-melted down Statue of Liberty. That's when he says his famous line, "Damn you, water, hell, you finally did it." Yeah, let me tell you, when I first saw this movie, and I saw it on TV, I wasn't alive in 1968, but when I saw it on TV and I saw the end of what happened, I was like, I couldn't believe that. That was one of the most shocking moments in cinematic history. It still remains one of those shocking moments. As a matter of fact, that sounds like another Strange Planet show. So apparently there was a nuclear war that wiped everything out. Human beings became all messed up, and apes acquired the power of that kind of keen intelligence. I mean, we already know they're intelligent, but boy, it took it to another level. And we all know how that works out. So, with all the incarnations, and I hate the Tim Burton version. Don't even get me started on that one. I could spend a half an hour just condemning that one to hell. All right, guys and gals, here's my final nuclear movie. Number 1 for me is my favorite monster of all time. I'm talking about Godzilla. See, this is a cool model right here I have of Godzilla right here. This is from Godzilla 2000. Spikes are very elongated and pronounced, and he looks pretty badass. Godzilla first came out in 1954. Now, think about the year for a minute. 1954. This movie was produced by a Japanese film company called Toho. See where I'm going with this? 1954 hasn't even been a full decade since the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That was the moment that not only ended the Second World War, but opened up a new age of, oh my God, this could potentially happen to all of us. Well, it's funny. That was also the same year that the United States tested a thermonuclear bomb, one of the first ones, because there's a difference between thermonuclear and atomic. Thermonuclear is like 1,000 times more powerful. Off of the Bikini Islands. And there was a fishing boat, a Japanese fishing boat, not too far from it. And the guys were just there hanging out when all of a sudden, Flash, boom, like the sun went up in the middle of the night. I mean, they were okay for that moment. They felt the heat. But what happened was all the fish they had caught got contaminated and got messed up. And many of the people that were on that boat eventually died from radiation poisoning. It wasn't a good incident. They suffered burns and things of that nature. It happened around the same year. I'm not too sure whether or not it influenced Godzilla, because in one of the very first scenes you see in Godzilla, when it first comes out in 1954, is people on a boat. I think it might have been a fishing boat too. And all of a sudden, Godzilla comes up out of the ocean. You don't see him yet, but you see the boat sink in a blaze of fire and radioactive flash. The idea is that Godzilla was this prehistoric monster, a dinosaur, if you will, that was in some kind of suspended state for millions and millions of years, since, I guess, the Jurassic or Cretaceous age, 65 million years, whatever. And what happened was the nuclear testing that happened in the South Pacific around that time, not long after the Second World War ended, not only awoken this sleeping giant, but basically radiated it to something like this. I first saw Godzilla when I was a little kid, so I was all about this. This was so cool. I was like, wow, this thing is like hot. But the story behind that whole point of that film, really, as you watched it, as you continue to watch it, they find out what it is. They find out it's heading to Tokyo. It comes to Tokyo. It destroys Tokyo. Lives are destroyed. Lives are shattered. Families are killed. And this one scientist, Dr. Serizawa, is pushed into a corner where he must make a decision, basically, onto what, using this invention he made called the Oxygen Destroyer to try to destroy this beast. Of course, history, we all know the end product. I mean, Godzilla has become a worldwide phenomenon, and they continue making films to this day. Actually, they're finishing up on Godzilla 2 from the new films. The first one that came out in 2014 with Gareth Edwards. Awesome flick. I liked it. Nonetheless, the original Godzilla, I have a Blu-ray copy of it. It's awesome. I watch it from time to time, and I remember, it gives you perspective. Side note, the one that I saw, the 1954 Godzilla, was actually an American version that they inserted scenes with Raymond Burr as a newspaper journalist that was there to see the whole thing happen firsthand. He kind of basically gave American viewing audiences the narrative of what was happening in the sequence of events of the 1954 film Godzilla. The product of human arrogance, basically, is what the message of the movie is about. You mess with nature, nature is gonna mess with you back. What is the solution? Don't mess with nature. You'll get this. Its message was strong and profound, especially very early on in the nuclear age. You got to remember, this was not even a decade before the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I mean, those were tragic moments in human history, sobering moments. So there you have it, guys. The top 5 nuclear movies of pop culture regarding nuclear war. What are your favorite nuclear war movies? Talk to me. Comment below and share with me what you think about this whole thing about nuclear war and its intertwining into American pop culture and Hollywood. This is Ralph Perez from Strange Planet. Take care.